Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. The rain hammered against Chris Durham's workshop windows as he sanded the curved leg of a mahogany dining table. Wood shavings curled at his feet, and the familiar scent of sawdust filled his lungs. At 48, his hands were calloused and strong, marked by 25 years of crafting furniture that would outlive him. His phone buzzed on the workbench, interrupting the rhythm of his work. "Mr. Durham?" The voice was clipped, official. "This is Detective Miriam Klein with the county police. We need you to come to the medical examiner's office immediately." Chris set down his sandpaper, his jaw tightening. "What's this about?" "Your daughter killed herself. We need someone to identify the body." The words hit him like a physical blow. Chris gripped the edge of the workbench. "I don't have a daughter. I have one son. You've got the wrong person. Mr. Durham, the deceased had your address in her possession. Her identification lists you as next of kin. Please come down to the morgue, or we'll have to send officers to escort you." Chris's mind raced. 22 years ago, his wife Jane had given birth to twins in a complicated delivery. She told him their daughter died within hours, that only their son Wade survived. He'd held his baby boy while Jane recovered, numb with grief for the child he'd never gotten to hold. 3 months later, Jane vanished, leaving only a note saying she couldn't handle motherhood. Chris had raised Wade alone, pouring everything into being both parents for his son. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Chris said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his thoughts. Wade emerged from the back office, wiping grease from his hands. At 22, he was built like his father, broad-shouldered and solid, with the same sharp jaw and intense gray eyes. He'd inherited Chris's talent for working with his hands, though he pursued mechanical engineering at the state university while helping in the shop. "Dad? What's wrong?" Chris grabbed his jacket. "Police called. Someone died, and they think I'm related to her. It doesn't make sense, but I need to check it out. I'm coming with you." The medical examiner's office was a stark concrete building that smelled of antiseptic and death. Detective Klein met them in the lobby, a woman in her 40s, with tired eyes and graying hair pulled into a tight bun. She studied Chris with the careful attention of someone trained to read people. "Mr. Durham, thank you for coming." Her gaze shifted to Wade. "This is my son, Wade. Only child I have, like I told you." Klein's expression flickered with something Chris couldn't read. "Please follow me." The morgue was colder than Chris expected, the fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving. A sheet-covered form lay on a steel table. Klein nodded to the attendant, who pulled back the sheet from the face. Chris stumbled backward, his breath catching. Wade caught his arm, then went rigid himself. The girl on the table couldn't have been more than 22. Her features were delicate but unmistakable. The same gray eyes Wade inherited from Chris. The same straight nose, the same slight cleft in her chin. Her face was Wade's in feminine form, as if someone had painted his son's portrait in softer strokes. Even in death, the resemblance was staggering. "That's impossible," Wade whispered. "Dad?" Chris couldn't speak. The room tilted. That face, he'd seen it before, in dreams where the daughter he'd lost had lived, in nightmares where Jane's lies were truth. "Her identification says Natalie Walker, age 22, Klein said quietly. "But we found documents in her apartment, adoption records, birth certificates. Her original name was Lucy Durham, born the same day and time as Wade Durham. Twins." The word detonated in Chris's chest. "My daughter died at birth. My wife told me." "Your wife lied," Klein interrupted. "Lucy was placed for adoption through a private agency 3 days after birth. The adoptive parents, Richard and Karen Russell, raised her in Nebraska. Karen Russell died last year. Richard Russell died when Lucy was 15. She only recently discovered she was adopted and started searching for her biological family." Wade's voice was hollow. "I had a sister. The preliminary examination suggests suicide by overdose," Klein continued. "But there are inconsistencies. Bruising on her arms that suggests restraint. The pills found in her system were prescription medication, but we found no prescription in her name. I'm not convinced this was suicide, Mr. Durham. I think someone wanted it to look that way." Chris forced himself to focus. Years of single parenthood had taught him to compartmentalize grief, to function through pain. "What else did you find?" Klein pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. Her apartment was almost empty, No laptop, no phone, those were missing. But we found this hidden behind a heating vent. The photo showed a leather journal. Klein swiped to the next image, showing a page of handwriting. Chris leaned closer, reading his daughter's words. Found her. Mom's name is Jane Slater. She's alive. She didn't die like Richard told me. She's living in Ashford, married to someone named Kenneth Stevens. Why did she give me away? Why did she lie? Tomorrow I'm going to meet her. Tomorrow I get answers. The entry was dated 4 days ago. Jane, Chris said, her name tasting like poison. She's here? In Ashford? You know her? She's my ex-wife. Wade's mother. She left 22 years ago. I thought. Chris's hands clenched into fists. I thought she was gone for good. She told me our daughter died. Klein's eyes sharpened with the focus of a detective sensing a break in a case. We need to talk to her. Do you have any information on her whereabouts? No. But I'll find her. Chris's voice was iron. If Jane had anything to do with Lucy's death, I'll find her. Mr. Durham, this is a police investigation. My daughter is dead. Chris met Klein's gaze. The daughter I didn't know I had. The daughter I thought was dead for 22 years. Someone took her from me twice. I'm not sitting on the sidelines while you do your job. Klein studied him for a long moment. Finally, she handed him a card. Stay in touch. And Mr. Durham, don't do anything stupid. If this is murder, the people responsible are dangerous. Chris pocketed the card. When can we claim her body? We'll need to complete the autopsy first. A few days at least. I'm sorry for your loss. In the parking lot, Wade leaned against the truck, staring at nothing. Rain had started again, cold and relentless. We had a sister. All this time, I had a twin sister, and I never knew. Chris put a hand on his son's shoulder. Your mother lied to both of us. But we're going to find out why. And if she killed Lucy, we're going to make her pay for it. How do we even start? We start with Jane's husband, Kenneth Stevens. Chris pulled out his phone, already searching. Let's find out who he is and what he's hiding. The name Kenneth Stevens appeared in dozens of search results. Chris and Wade spent the night in the workshop, piecing together a picture of the man Jane had married. On the surface, he was respectable CEO of Stevens Financial Consulting, owned a large house in Ashford's affluent north side, active in local charities. Photos showed a handsome man in his early 50s, with silver hair and expensive suits, Jane smiling beside him at various events. But Chris had learned to look beyond surfaces. He'd spent years evaluating Wood, identifying flaws hidden beneath veneer. Dad, look at this, Wade said, pointing to his laptop screen. I found an old news article from 8 years ago. Stevens Financial was investigated for fraud, but the charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. Chris read over Wade's shoulder. The article mentioned clients who'd lost significant investments, accusations of misrepresentation, suspicious transfers. All of it collapsed when key witnesses recanted their testimony. Witnesses who suddenly changed their stories, Chris muttered. That's not insufficient evidence. That's intimidation. Wade clicked through more links. There's a pattern here. Every few years, there's a complaint or investigation, but nothing sticks. And look, 6 years ago, a former business partner of Stevens died in a car accident right before he was scheduled to testify in a civil suit. Convenient. Too convenient. Wade's fingers flew across the keyboard. I'm checking Lucy's social media. What little there is. She was private, didn't post much. But here 3 weeks ago, she posted a photo of herself at a coffee shop. The caption says, New city, new beginnings, ready to find answers. Chris leaned closer. The coffee shop's window showed a street sign in the reflection, Maple and 3rd, downtown Ashford. She'd been here 3 weeks, long enough to find Jane. Long enough to become a threat, Wade said quietly. Chris's phone buzzed. An email from Detective Klein found Lucy's phone records. Last call was to a burner number, untraceable. But her second to last call was to an Ashford number registered to Stevens Financial, time of call, 6:47 p.m., 3 days before her death. Duration, 13 minutes. She called them, Chris said, showing Wade the email. Lucy called Stevens's company. And 4 days later, she's dead. Chris stood, pacing the workshop. His mind worked through the angles like planning a complex joinery. We need to see Lucy's apartment. There might be something the police missed. Klein said they already searched it. Police look for evidence of crime. We're looking for evidence of motive. Our daughter was murdered, Wade. I know it. And I know who did it. They drove to the address Klein had provided. A modest apartment complex on the east side of town. Lucy's unit was on the second floor, still sealed with police tape. Chris glanced around the empty hallway, then pulled a lockpick set from his pocket, a skill learned during leaner years when he couldn't afford to call a locksmith for his workshop. Dad, that's breaking and entering. It's our daughter's home. We have a right to be here. The lock gave way easily. Inside, the apartment was sparse, exactly as Klein had described. A futon, a small table, a few boxes of belongings. Lucy had been living minimally, temporarily. She hadn't planned to stay long. Wade searched the kitchenette while Chris examined the bedroom. The heating vent Klein mentioned was behind the bed. Chris checked it thoroughly, finding nothing, but his eyes caught on the baseboard nearby. One section slightly misaligned, as if recently disturbed. He pulled a screwdriver from his jacket and carefully pried it away from the wall. Behind it, taped to the back of the board, was a folded piece of paper. His hands shook as he unfolded it. Lucy's handwriting covered the page. If something happens to me, this is what I know. My birth mother, Jane Slater, married Kenneth Stevens 6 months after leaving my birth father. They've been married 21 years. Kenneth runs a financial consulting firm, but it's a front. They target wealthy, lonely men, especially widowers and divorcees. Jane befriends them, starts relationships, gains their trust. Then Kenneth invests their money. The money disappears. By the time the victims realize they've been scammed, Jane is gone, and the paper trail is impossible to trace. I found out because I followed Mom after our first meeting. She was with another man, not Kenneth, acting like a different person. I watched her for 3 days. She's running a con right now on someone named Francis White. He owns a bar downtown. I confronted her yesterday. Told her I knew everything. She cried, said she had no choice, that Kenneth controls her. She begged me not to tell anyone. Said Kenneth would kill us both if he found out she'd told me the truth. I don't believe her tears. She chose this life. She chose to abandon me and my brother. She chose to keep hurting people. I'm going to the police tomorrow with everything I have. I'm going to make sure they pay for what they've done. Chris read the letter twice, his rage building with each word. Wade appeared in the doorway, face pale. Dad, I found something in the trash. A receipt from a restaurant called Moretti's. 2 days before Lucy died. 2 meals, paid in cash. She met with someone. Probably Jane. Wade's voice was thick with emotion. She was our mother, and she's a monster. Chris carefully folded the letter, slipping it into his jacket. Francis White. Lucy mentioned him. We need to warn him. You know Francis? Everyone knows Francis. He owns O'Malley's bar downtown. Good man. Lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago. Chris's jaw clenched. He's exactly their type of target. They found Francis White restocking bottles behind his bar's counter, preparing for the evening crowd. He was a stocky man with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard. Wearing his perpetual flannel shirt, he'd given Chris his first carpentry job 25 years ago, commissioned a bar top that still gleamed under the dim lights. Chris, Wade, what brings you boys here? Francis's smile faded when he saw their expressions. What's wrong? Francis, I need you to tell me about any woman you've been seeing recently, Chris said. Francis's cheeks reddened. Now, that's personal, Chris. It's also life or death. Please. Something in Chris's tone made Francis set down the bottle he was holding. All right. There's a woman I've been seeing for about 6 weeks, Jane Sheffield. We met at a grief support group. She lost her husband last year, said she was new in town, looking to make friends. We've been taking it slow. But, he trailed off. She's easy to talk to. Makes me laugh. First time I felt like living again since Sarah died. What does she look like? Francis pulled out his phone, showing them a photo. Jane smiled at the camera. Her hair different color and cut than Chris remembered, but unmistakably her. She'd aged well. Her beauty now refined rather than youthful. The sight of her face made Chris's stomach turn. That's my ex-wife, Chris said flatly. Her real name is Jane Slater. She's running a con on you, Francis. She and her husband target lonely men, gain their trust, then steal everything they can. Francis's face went white. No, Jane wouldn't. Has she mentioned investing money? Wade asked. Maybe introduced you to a financial advisor? Frances sank onto a bar stool. Last week, she said her financial advisor helped her recover from her late husband's debts. Suggested I talk to him. Kenneth Stevens, Chris said. How much were you planning to invest? $75,000. It's everything I have saved. I was going to sign papers this Friday. Frances's hands trembled. My God. Sarah's insurance money. The kid's inheritance. Everything. Don't sign anything, Chris said. And stay away from her. I can't believe. 6 weeks. She seems so genuine. Frances looked up, eyes haunted. Why are you warning me now? How did you find out? Chris's voice was steady, but pain edged every word. Because my daughter investigated them and ended up dead 3 days ago. The daughter I didn't know I had until yesterday. She tried to stop them, and they killed her. Frances stood, crossing to Chris. Jesus Christ, Chris. I'm so sorry. They've been doing this for years, Wade added. My mother and Stevens, ruining lives, stealing everything people have. We're going to stop them, Chris said. But I need to know everything about your relationship with Jane. Every detail, every place you met, every conversation. Can you do that? Frances nodded, his grief support group vulnerability replaced by hardening resolve. I'll do better than that. I'll help you destroy them. Over the next 2 days, Chris and Wade became ghosts, watching Kenneth Stevens' house from different locations, documenting Jane's movements. They followed her to coffee shops, shopping centers, watching her perform the charade of normalcy. She met with Frances twice more, and Chris had to physically restrain his friend from confronting her. Not yet, Chris had said. We need more. We need evidence that will put them away forever. Wade hacked into Lucy's email, a talent he'd never shared with his father until now, and found correspondence with a private investigator Lucy had hired. The PI had compiled a file on Kenneth and Jane's victims spanning 15 years. 12 men, all widowers or divorcees, all left financially ruined. 1 had committed suicide. 2 had lost their businesses. The pattern was clear and devastating. They're professional predators, Wade said, staring at the files. How do people like this exist? Chris thought about the girl on the morgue table, the daughter he'd never gotten to meet. Because the law moves slowly, and people like them know how to disappear before consequences catch up. So, what do? We make sure they can't disappear this time. Detective Klein called on the 3rd day. Autopsy results are in. Ruling is still officially undetermined. But between us, someone held your daughter down and forced those pills down her throat. There's evidence of asphyxiation. Someone covered her mouth and nose until she swallowed. This was murder, Mr. Durham. But proving who did it is another matter. What about Kenneth and Jane? Both have alibis for the night Lucy died. They were at a charity event with 200 witnesses. But that doesn't mean they didn't hire someone. Klein paused. I need more than a letter and suspicion to get a warrant. Give me something concrete and I'll bury them. Chris hung up and turned to Wade and Frances, who joined them in the workshop. We need to catch them in the act. How? Frances asked. Chris smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. We give them exactly what they want. A mark too good to refuse. The plan took shape over the next week. Chris would pose as Gregory Mason, a wealthy craftsman who'd recently sold his business for significant profit. Wade created fake social media profiles, doctored bank statements, even a website showcasing Gregory's high-end furniture projects, all real pieces Chris had built over the years, but attributed to the fictional persona. Frances planted the bait, mentioning to Jane during their next meeting that his friend Gregory was new in town, grieving his late wife, looking for investment opportunities. Lonely, wealthy, and naive, Chris said as they rehearsed. Everything Jane looks for. You sure you want to do this? Wade asked. These people killed Lucy. They won't hesitate to kill you if they suspect something. That's why I have to be perfect. Chris studied the photograph of Kenneth Stevens. Men like him thrive on control. He thinks he's the smartest person in any room. That arrogance is his weakness. What's the end game here, Dad? Chris's eyes were cold. We make them think they've won. Then we take everything from them, just like they did to Lucy. The first meeting happened at Moretti's, the same restaurant where Lucy had met with Jane. Chris arrived early, wearing an expensive watch Wade had borrowed from a classmate, carrying himself with the slight awkwardness of someone unused to wealth. When Jane walked in, he felt his chest constrict. She was older, but still beautiful in a predatory way. Her smile was practiced, warm but calculated. She wore a simple dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Gregory?" She extended her hand. "I'm Jane Sheffield. Francis has told me so much about you." Her hand was soft, manicured. Chris shook it, fighting every instinct to recoil. "Francis speaks highly of you as well. Thank you for meeting me." They ordered wine. Jane's performance was flawless. She asked about his late wife. Fictional. His children. Also fictional. His business. She was sympathetic, interested, never pushing. She mentioned her own late husband casually, bonding over shared loss. "Francis mentioned you were looking into investments," she said finally. "I have to say, after Richard died, I was lost financially. If it hadn't been for my advisor, I don't know what I would have done." "I'm drowning in details," Chris admitted, playing his role. "I've always been good with my hands, but numbers and portfolios? That's another language. You should meet with Kenneth, my advisor. He specializes in helping people like us successful, but not financial experts. He's honest, which is rare these days. I'd appreciate that. I have about 2 million sitting in accounts, earning nothing. I know I should do something with it, but I don't trust most financial people." Jane's eyes flickered so briefly, Chris almost missed it. 2 million. The hook was baited. "Kenneth is different. I'll set up a meeting. How's Friday?" "Friday works." As they said goodbye, Jane touched his arm. "It's nice to meet someone who understands loss. Most people don't know what to say." Chris watched her walk away, his hands clenched under the table. She had no idea she'd just had dinner with a man whose life she'd destroyed 22 years ago. The father of the daughter she'd abandoned and killed. Friday's meeting was at Stevens Financial, a sleek office in a downtown high-rise. Kenneth Stevens met Chris in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He was exactly as his photos suggested, distinguished, confident, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Gregory, please sit. Jane tells me you're looking to make your money work for you. That's the goal. I'm out of my depth here. That's what I'm here for." Kenneth launched into his pitch: safe investments, guaranteed returns, minimal risk. It was all lies, and Chris knew it. But he played the eager, naive client perfectly. "I have to say, this sounds almost too good to be true," Chris said, setting up Kenneth's favorite opening. "I understand the skepticism, but look at Jane's portfolio." Kenneth showed him fake documents detailing Jane's supposed returns. "She came to me with very little. Now, she's financially secure for life. How much would you recommend I invest initially?" "Start with 500,000. Once you see the returns, you can invest more." Chris whistled. "That's significant. Significant returns require significant investment, Gregory. But I understand if you need time to think." "No," Chris interrupted. "I've been thinking too long. My wife always said I overthought everything. Let's do it." Kenneth's smile widened. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant draw up the paperwork. We can finalize everything next week." As Chris left the office, Wade called. "How did it go?" He took the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. "Dad," Detective Klein called. "They found the person who killed Lucy. Low-level enforcer, named Danny Morse. Has connections to organized crime. He was paid in cash to make it look like suicide. They arrested him an hour ago." Chris stopped walking, his heart hammering. Did he name who hired him? He's not talking yet. But Klein thinks he was hired through an intermediary. She's working on tracing the payment. Keep me updated. And Wade? Make sure you're recording everything at the workshop. I want every piece of evidence documented. Already done. Be careful, Dad. The next week, Chris signed the papers transferring $500,000 into Kenneth's investment fund. Except the money didn't exist. Wade had created an elaborate fake transfer trail that would collapse the moment anyone looked closely. But Kenneth didn't look closely. He saw an easy mark and moved forward with practiced efficiency. Jane continued to cultivate their friendship. She invited Gregory to dinners, introduced him to their social circle, made him feel welcomed. Chris played along, all while Francis wore a wire and Detective Klein built her case. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Danny Morse, facing life in prison, made a deal. He admitted he'd been hired to kill Lucy Durham, that the intermediary was a lawyer named Lowell Osborne who handled Kenneth's legal affairs. Klein got a warrant for Osborne's records. They're getting sloppy, Klein told Chris during a secret meeting. Osborne kept digital records of everything. I have proof of payments for Danny Morse's services, emails discussing the Durham problem, communications about covering their tracks. I can tie Kenneth and Jane directly to your daughter's murder. When do you move? Soon. But I need you to finish your play first. I want them caught red-handed, with all their victims as witnesses. Can you do that? Chris smiled. I can do that. The trap was set for Kenneth and Jane's annual charity gala, an event they hosted every year to maintain their respectable facade. Chris attended as Gregory Mason, with Frances as his +1. Wade positioned himself outside with Detective Klein and her team, ready to move on Chris's signal. The gala was opulent crystal chandeliers, expensive champagne, Ashford's elite mingling in evening wear. Kenneth gave a speech about giving back to the community, about integrity and trust. Chris watched from the crowd, his rage carefully contained. Jane found him after Kenneth's speech. Gregory, I'm so glad you came. Kenneth wanted me to tell you your investment is already showing returns. 20% in just 2 weeks. That's incredible. You should consider investing more. Kenneth has an opportunity coming up that's exclusive to his best clients. How much more? The rest of your portfolio. $1.5 million. The returns could set you up for life. This was at the final push, the moment they revealed their true intention to take everything. Chris smiled. Let me think about it. But Jane, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret choices you've made? Things you did when you were younger? Something flickered in Jane's expression. Why do you ask? Because I've been lying to you, Jane. My name isn't Gregory Mason. Chris watched her face pale. It's Chris Durham, and you killed my daughter. Jane's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Conversations nearby stopped. Kenneth looked over, sensing trouble. I don't know what you're talking about, Jane whispered. Lucy Durham. She came to you 4 weeks ago, asking why you abandoned her. Why you gave her up for adoption while keeping her twin brother. She discovered your con operation with Kenneth, and you had her murdered. Kenneth pushed through the crowd. Mr. Mason, I think you've had too much to drink. My name is Chris Durham, and you're a murderer? Stevens. The ballroom went silent. Kenneth's practiced smile faltered. This is absurd, security. I wouldn't call security if I were you, Chris said loudly, addressing the entire room. Because Detective Klein is outside with arrest warrants for both of you. For fraud, embezzlement, and first-degree murder. You have no proof, Kenneth hissed. Don't I? Chris pulled out his phone, playing a recording. Kenneth's voice filled the room. The Durham girl is a problem. Osborne says his contact can handle it. Make it look like suicide, and no one will ask questions. The recording continued, detailing the plan to murder Lucy. Jane's voice joined Kenneth's. What about the father? What if he investigates? He won't. He thinks she's already dead. He doesn't even know she existed. Chris stopped the recording. Around them, guests stared in horror. Frances stepped forward, revealing the wire he'd been wearing. I have recordings too. Every lie you told me, every manipulation. Weeks of evidence. Kenneth's composure cracked. He grabbed Jane's arm. We're leaving. I don't think so. Wade appeared in the doorway. Detective Klein behind him with uniformed officers. Kenneth Stevens, Jane Slater. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and racketeering. Kenneth tried to run, but officers blocked every exit. He spun on Chris, his mask finally dropping to reveal the monster beneath. You think you've won? You think this matters? I have lawyers who will tear your case apart. No, you don't, Klein said, snapping handcuffs on his wrists. Your lawyer Lowell Osborne is already in custody. He gave us everything, every victim, every scam, every body you buried. It's over. Jane didn't resist as they cuffed her. She looked at Chris, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to hurt her. Lucy was my daughter. I loved her. You loved yourself more, Chris said quietly. You gave her up because she was inconvenient. You killed her because she was a threat. You don't know what love is. Jane. As they led her away, Jane's facade finally shattered. I'm sorry. Chris. I'm sorry. Chris didn't respond. He watched them take her and Kenneth through the ballroom, past the horrified guests who'd been charmed by their lies. Francis put a hand on his shoulder. "It's done," Francis said. "Not yet," Chris replied. The trial took 6 months to reach conclusion. Kenneth Stebbins and Jane Slater faced overwhelming evidence testimony from 12 victims, Danny Morse's confession, Lowell Osborne's records, the recordings Chris and Francis had collected. Kenneth's empire collapsed overnight as investigators uncovered accounts in offshore tax havens, properties purchased with stolen money, a trail of destroyed lives spanning decades. The prosecution painted a picture of two predators who'd refined their technique over 20 years. Jane would identify targets through grief support groups and social events, building emotional connections while Kenneth prepared the financial trap. Once a victim was sufficiently manipulated, their money would disappear into untraceable accounts. When victims complained or investigated, Kenneth's connections would intimidate them into silence. Lucy Durham had been their first murder, but prosecutors found evidence suggesting other deaths connected to their operation, the former business partner, a victim who'd threatened to go public, witnesses who'd recanted testimony. The body count was suspected to be higher than proven, but the confirmed charges were damning enough. Chris attended every day of the trial, Wade beside him. They listened to witnesses describe how Kenneth and Jane had ruined them, how they'd lost homes, businesses, futures. Francis testified about nearly losing everything. Detective Klein presented the evidence, tying them to Lucy's murder. When Chris took the stand, the defense attorney tried to paint him as a vengeful ex-husband with questionable methods. Chris met Kenneth's eyes across the courtroom and spoke clearly. "My daughter Lucy lived for 22 years believing her birth mother was dead. When she discovered the truth, she tried to do the right thing, expose criminals, save innocent people. For that, she was murdered. I spent 22 years not knowing my daughter existed. I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I can never get that time back. No sentence can undo that loss. But justice means they can never hurt anyone else's family the way they hurt mine." The defense tried to suggest Chris had fabricated evidence, that his elaborate con to trap Kenneth and Jane was entrapment. Klein dismantled that argument with the evidence from Osborne's files and Morse's testimony, proving the crimes predated Chris's investigation. Jane's lawyer argued she'd been controlled by Kenneth, that she was a victim too, but prosecutors presented emails and recordings showing Jane actively participating in planning cons, celebrating successful thefts, even suggesting targets. She was no victim, she was a willing, enthusiastic participant. The jury deliberated for 18 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Kenneth Stebbins, guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, racketeering, and 12 counts of grand theft. Sentence: life in prison without possibility of parole. Jane Slater, guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, racketeering, and 12 counts of grand theft. Sentence: life in prison without possibility of parole. Chris felt no triumph, only hollow relief. Wade squeezed his hand as Kenneth and Jane were led away in chains. Kenneth went in silence, his arrogance finally extinguished. Jane turned to look at Chris one last time, mouthing words he couldn't hear. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around. Chris read a prepared statement. "My daughter Lucy Durham was a nursing student, a kind person who wanted to help people. She died trying to stop criminals who'd hurt countless others. Her memory deserves more than revenge. It deserves justice. Today, we got that justice." Detective Klein appeared beside him. "Mr. Durham, we've recovered about 60% of the stolen funds from offshore accounts. Restitution will be distributed to verified victims. I wanted you to know Francis White will get his money back. Thank you, Detective, for everything. You did most of the work, though I'll deny that in official reports." Klein's expression softened. "Your daughter would be proud of you." Chris nodded, unable to speak. 6 months after the trial, Chris stood in Ashford Cemetery, placing flowers on a headstone that read, "Lucy Durham, beloved daughter and sister, taken too soon, forever remembered." Wade stood beside him, both of them silent in the morning light. They'd buried Lucy properly, given her a place in the family plot Chris had purchased years ago. Her adoptive mother Karen Russell was buried beside her. Chris had arranged the transfer, wanting Lucy to rest near at least one parent who'd loved her. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Wade said quietly. If things had been different, if Mom hadn't lied, Lucy and I would have grown up together. We'd have had 22 years as siblings. I think about that too, Chris admitted. Every day. Do you think she knew? Before she died, I mean, that we existed? Chris thought about the letter Lucy had written, hidden behind the baseboard. The determination in her words, the anger at injustice, the courage to confront her birth mother. I think she knew, and I think she wanted to meet us. That's why she came to Ashford. They took that from her. From all of us. Yeah. Chris placed his hand on the headstone, cool marble under his palm. But we made sure they can never take anything from anyone again. They stood there until the sun rose higher, warming the spring morning. Other mourners appeared in the cemetery, tending to their own losses. Life continued around them, indifferent to their grief. Francis found them as they were leaving, carrying his own flowers. He'd visited Lucy's grave every week since the trial, honoring the daughter of his best friend and the young woman who tried to save him. Chris, Wade, Francis greeted them. Wanted to let you know the restitution came through. Full $75,000. I'm using some of it to start a scholarship fund in Lucy's name. For nursing students. Thought she'd appreciate that. Chris felt his throat tighten. She would. Thank you, Francis. She saved my life. Even after she was gone. Least I can do is make sure her name means something good. Back at the workshop, Chris returned to the mahogany table he'd been working on when Klein's call had changed everything. Months had passed, but the project waited patiently. Wade joined him, picking up sandpaper without being asked. They worked in comfortable silence, the rhythm of craftsmanship soothing old wounds. Chris's hands moved across the wood, finding imperfections and smoothing them away. Some things could be fixed with patience and skill. Others left permanent scars. Dad, Wade said eventually. What do we do now? We live, Chris said simply. We work. We remember Lucy. We make sure her death meant something. Is that enough? Chris set down his tools, looking at his son, the child he'd raised alone, who'd become a man of integrity despite everything. It has to be. Justice doesn't erase loss, Wade. It just makes sure the loss wasn't for nothing. Wade nodded slowly, understanding settling over his features. They returned to work, father and son building something beautiful from raw materials, creating order from chaos. On the workbench, Chris had placed a small framed photo, the only picture of Lucy he had, taken from her apartment. She smiled in it, gray eyes bright with hope, unaware of the darkness in her future. Beside it, he'd placed a photo of Wade at the same age, their twin faces an undeniable testament to the family stolen from them. Every day, Chris looked at those photos and felt the weight of what might have been. Every day, he chose to continue anyway. Kenneth and Jane would spend their lives in separate prisons, their empire dismantled, their victims compensated. They would grow old in cells, stripped of everything they'd stolen and killed for. Danny Morse and Lowell Osborne were serving their own sentences. The web of corruption had been torn apart, root and branch. But Lucy was still gone. 22 years stolen, and now a lifetime of futures that would never exist. That evening, Chris sat in his workshop long after Wade had gone home to his own apartment. He pulled out the letter Lucy had hidden behind the baseboard, reading her words again. Her handwriting was neat, determined, full of righteous anger and courage. I'm going to make sure they pay for what they've done. We did it, Lucy, Chris said to the empty room. They paid. I just wish you were here to see it. The workshop was silent except for the ticking of the old clock Sarah, his late girlfriend, had given him years ago. Chris folded the letter carefully, placing it in a locked drawer along with other precious things. Wade's first drawing, photos of important moments, memories preserved against time's erosion. Tomorrow, he would wake and work and live. He would finish the mahogany table and start another project. He would have dinner with Wade and Francis, would laugh at old jokes and make new memories. Life would continue because it had to, because Lucy's death couldn't be allowed to destroy him the way Jane and Kenneth had destroyed so many others. But tonight, Chris Durham sat in his workshop and mourned the daughter he'd never known, the twin who'd been stolen from Wade, the young woman who'd died trying to save strangers from predators. He mourned, and he remembered, and he vowed that Lucy's name would live on as more than a victim. She would be remembered as the brave young woman who'd exposed killers, who'd saved lives even in death, who'd brought justice to those who thought themselves above it. Outside, night fell over Ashford. In separate prisons across the state, Kenneth Evans and Jane Slater faced their first of countless nights locked away from the world they terrorized. Their reign was over. Their victims were beginning to heal. And in a quiet workshop, surrounded by the smell of wood and the tools of his trade, Chris Durham found a measure of peace. Not forgiveness, he would never forgive what had been done. But peace in knowing that Lucy's death had exposed monsters, saved innocents, and brought a family together even in absence. The daughter he'd never known had given him a final gift: purpose, justice, and the knowledge that even the most carefully constructed lies eventually crumble before truth and determination. Chris turned off the workshop lights and locked the door. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new chances to honor Lucy's memory through action rather than grief. Tonight, he could rest knowing that justice had been served and that Lucy Durham, daughter, sister, hero, would never be forgotten. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.